All right, here we are, episode, I think, 32 of Merriwether's World. This week we will be looking at wild medicines for wilderness survival. As usual, I am joined with the ever popular Merriweather. No special guest other than her tonight. I do want to talk a shout out to Wazoo Survival Gear, tonight's sponsor for the event. It seemed, since we were talking about wilderness survival, it would be good to drag Wazoo Survival in. Around my neck is their Viking sharpening stone. So, early Vikings used to carry their stones on leather thongs to sharpen their knives. Of course, you take it off your neck before then. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Mark Merriwether Vorderbruggen. By day, I am a formulation chemist for a consumer products company. But evenings and weekends, I am Merriwether, teaching people about the wild edible and medicinal plants around them. I have the book Idiot's Guide Foraging that you can purchase through the website, www.foragingtexas.com. And I'm trying to set things down here. So, why don't we just jump right into wild medicines for wilderness survival? So, bring this up. And actually, I'm going to jump back to me. One thing I want to point out, another thing you can get from Wazoo Survival is the foraging bandana. And one of the things it has on there, so these are 12 plants that are easy to find all around, actually, not only North America, peekaboo, I can see you, but even Europe, because a number of the weeds actually, were originally from Europe. Anyway, so along with the edible uses, and if there's poisonous parts, it also has medicinal properties. And to purchase this bandana, let me bring up the website and learn all about it. You need to go to the Foraging Texas website, bandana. So one thing it does, this website, is it lists all 12 plants in great detail with multiple pictures. So along with the bandana, you can get an in-depth study of the plants, thereby just relying on the bandana as a memory aid to help you in, times of crises, if you will. But all the information is here, including the medicinal uses. So, yeah, I will say if you buy it through my link, like with the Amazon store, I get a small percentage of the profits from the bandana. So, thank you very much if you buy it there. So, wild medicines for wilderness survival. Now, let me say one thing that ideally you should have some sort of first aid kit with you. And in the case of a serious injury, don't just try and caveman through it with wild plants. Get to a doctor. If anything, you can think of these plants as things to help control the situation until you can extract yourself or your friends can get you out of the wilderness to seek real medical help. So, what sort of things are we going to talk about? Well, like I said, this is going to be a multi-week sort of class. This week, we are just going to focus on diarrhea, dysentery, and food poisoning. In the weeks after that, we'll look at bleeding, plants to deal with bleeding, infected wounds, or better yet, things you can wash out the wound with to prevent an infection, fungal infections like athlete's foot, pain, and then insect bites and stings. So these are what we'll be talking about, but tonight it will be the diarrhea, dysentery, and food poisoning. The reason this came up actually is a number of wilderness bushcraft survival experts that I follow have recently had incidences when they were out in the woods and ended up really sick due to like food poisoning or bad water. Let me just go up. So if you follow the show Alone on the History Channel, the person who is expected to be this season's winner, Danny Dust, actually had to tap out in only 8 days. He ended up he ate some tainted muskrat and ended up with very severe diarrhea and dehydrated and it prevented him from taking medications that he needs. So the sort of food sickness and dysentery diarrhea is actually fairly common in the wild. It's as you know, maybe not as common as cuts and burns, but it's still up there. In the Boy Scouts, we referred to it as beaver fever. Usually, this sort of dysentery food poisoning is caused by 4 different types of microbes, so bacteria, protozoa types. So the cryptosporidiums, that and the Giardia are usually found in untreated water, whereas the E. coli is more found in feces, and then improper hygiene transfers it to your food and then into you, and suddenly you are sick with food poisoning. And then salmonella is similar to that, also usually a result of improperly prepared food like chicken or eggs or different meats. More recently, even different garden or well, the commercially farmed lettuce and broccoli and things like that. So all these things can lead to really debilitating diarrhea, food poisoning. One of the effects of this is often a dehydration, because as you are expelling all the water, you end up with not enough water left in you to live. So one of the things you're going to notice in tonight's presentation is, in most cases, it's recommended that you drink like 2 gallons of the different medicinal teas that we'll be talking about for this to help deal with it. That's partially to get enough in you to try and kill the microbes or otherwise interfere with the stuff that's causing the dysentery, along with also rehydrating you. Okay, any questions at this point? No questions. All right, so let's move on to the first plant that I will mention again, that most of these plants can be found at least all over North America and quite likely all over the world, some variation of them. Oh, so actually I guess we'll just give you an overview of the plants that we'll be looking at. First will be what I call brambles. That is just a generic term that covers things like dewberries, blackberries, raspberries, the thorny vine with the multi-cluster fruit. Oaks, there are oak trees all over the world. Sycamores are mainly North American. The willow trees are found all over the world. Elderberry, all over the world. Ragweed, mainly North America. And then the last one actually isn't a plant, but it's white clay. And that's found all over the world. So these are the plants we'll be talking about. So let us jump in, starting with the brambles, the blackberry, dewberry, raspberries. And if you remember the earlier presentations, the first slide will be on plant identification to help you identify the plant. And then the second plant will be more in-depth in how to use it. So starting with the brambles, the leaves of the brambles, they are going to be compound. That means they'll have a stalk and then multiple leaves coming off it. In the case of the brambles, the compound leaves will be in a kind of a star shape. There could be just 3, but as they mature, be more like 5 leaflets. The edges of the leaves have sharp serrations, whether it be blackberry, dewberry, or raspberry. They are pinnate veined. Going back, pinnate vein means they have a center vein, and then all the other veins come off it. Think like branches off a Christmas tree, where the center vein is the trunk, and then the other side branches are the side veins. So Christmas tree, pinnate veins. And the leaves alternate along the stem, so they zigzag up the stem. They're not going to be directly across from each other. They're going to be, alternating. The stem itself will be thorny, like rose thorns, very sharp little, generally hooked prickers. The stems will be either green, or in the case of the raspberry and some of the more northern brambles, they could be more of a blue-gray in color. They will either grow in an upright cane, think like a rose stem, or they'll creep along the ground. But you'll have the alternating compound serrated leaves with pinnate vein structure on a thorny stem that's either upright or creeping along the ground. They grow just about everywhere. Since we were talking about wilderness as opposed to roadside sort of situations, you will find them in woods, generally more in clearings or on the edges of woods, on the clearings, in openings in the woods. And then the wetter, the better, usually. They prefer to have water around. So wet clearings, like along streams or ponds in the woods, is where you're going to find them. Now, what do you use on this? The main thing with the brambles is the root. So you want to dig up the bramble, you want to peel the outer skin off the root, you want to chop it up real fine, you want to start boiling it. Now, the roots contain a mixture of chemicals such as tannic acid and gallic acid, which you'll hear again when we get into the oaks. It also has some terpenoids, some sterols, and phenols. So all of these work together mainly as bactericides, antimicrobial properties, but they also have a drying effect on the stool somewhat. So the general use is you chop up a 1/4 cup of the root, so the peeled root. It's not going to taste all that great, but it's going to taste even worse if you leave the root on and you don't want the extra dirt and so forth. So scrape off the root, chop up, put a 1/4 cup, boil it in 1 quart of water. Traditionally, what you will do is boil that quart of water until it's down to 1/2 quart. Take it off the fire, add water back to bring it back to a quart to help cool it down. And once it's cool enough to drink, start drinking it. Now, in general, you will want to drink about 2 gallons of this per day while you are fighting the dysentery or diarrhea. A lot of it is you just need to replace that water that you're losing. If it gets really bitter at that point, you can cut it down some, dilute it with some more cool water. Please, of course, make sure that the cool water has been sterilized somehow. So it also has been boiled earlier or filtered with a actual backpacking filter. I should put a link to a filter. Or chemically treated with like permanganate or iodine or some of the other different ways, peroxides, oxidizing agents, bleach, something to kill the bacteria and other microbes in there. Ooh,
we got a lot of questions.
Oh, right. Already got questions.
All right. So, are the thornless, tame brambles just as effective as the wild ones?
Oh, good question. Yes. So the lack of thorns is not going to change the chemistry going on down in the roots. So the thornless ones will also work. The thornless ones usually are not found in the wild. Actually, I should probably. So I'm assuming you perhaps have thornless ones growing around home. And in that case, really just regular tea made really, really concentrated will do a good job because it has the tannic acid in there. But yeah, the roots will work. Okay, next.
Would dried root be just as good as well?
Yes, the dried root is absolutely fine if you want to like pre-package some medication. The nice thing about this, I guess if that were the case, if you were heading out into the woods instead of bringing dried root, really you would be better off bringing some tablets of Imodium AD or some of the other sort of things like that. That will work much more effectively and much more quickly. I really consider these things, you're out in the woods on day 12 or 14 of a marathon hiking session, and you just, are either ill prepared or otherwise not ready. But yeah, and in the case of this, I still would rather you brought some Imodium with you. It's just if you didn't, this is what you would use. Are there more?
One more. Is bramble brew good as a preventative in a survival situation?
Ooh, good question. Yeah, but I would not drink 2 gallons of it. And I would also not trust it to keep you safe. You would still want to boil the water or otherwise treat the water. Um, the problem with tannic acid in particular is large doses of it can lead to constipation, which is good if you have diarrhea, not so good if you don't have diarrhea. So I definitely wouldn't drink 2 gallons of it, maybe a quart a day, but no more than that. Just to, kind of preload the system some, if you will, but definitely still wash your hands, treat your water, don't let your chickens sit out in the sun. Okay, any others?
That's all.
That's it? Okay. And also you can see at the bottom here, I did include links to different scientific articles that go into details and talk about the medicinal properties for those of you who want to read more into it. This particular article, I want to say, was the one that also actually compared the bramble roots to licorice plants and dandelions as far as their antimicrobial properties. But 1/4 cup in a quart, drink 2 gallons a day. Hopefully you have a friend that can go out and grab the bramble roots. I will say even in the wintertime, if you can get to the soil when the above ground plant is all dead and dried, the roots underground will still be viable and alive. So even in the wintertime, when the surface plant is dead, it's still easy to spot the dewberries, blackberries, raspberries because of their thorny vine. All right, the next is oak trees. So let's talk about oak tree identification. You can see the oak tree leaves come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, but in general, they are simple, which means they don't have any, well, a compound is where you have multiple leaflets, and a simple is where you just have one leaflet. And this is just a general botany term. The edges of the leaf will be intact in that they won't have tiny serrations like the dewberry, blackberry. They won't have little tiny bumps. There'll be one continuous line. That being said, they will be lobed, and occasionally they will have little prickers on them, like the live oak has little points on it.
My chickens usually choose where they want to sit.
Okay. Sorry. Chicken humor from the audience. Kevin?
Miss Curie-Hyatt.
Oh, okay. I always think of you as the one with goats, not chickens, but okay. All right. Pinnate vein, so going back to the Christmas tree sort of thing, where we have a center vein and the other veins coming off it and alternating along the branch. The bark will be craggy. Where you find it will be more in the wood lowlands. So in the lower valleys, along rivers, again, more wet. In the upper highland areas, you're going to have more pine trees. If there are a lot of pine trees around, it's less likely that there will be oak until you get to a stream or a pond or something like that. But then out in fields too, you'll find them standing alone or several of them out there. So good tree to know. Multiple parts that you can use to deal with dysentery, diarrhea, food poisoning. First, the oak galls. If you've ever spent some time just staring at an oak tree, very likely you have noticed these weird round balls on them, on the oak tree. This is the result of what's called the oak gall wasp. It's a solitary wasp that lays its eggs in the bark of the oak tree, and along with the eggs, it basically infects the tree with a genetic disorder that causes the tree to start growing a round ball around the egg to protect it. So you get these round galls. The tree hates this. It doesn't want its DNA messed with any more than you do. So it starts pumping a number of chemicals into that oak gall to try and kill the larva, the little bug in there. And the end result then is these oak galls, especially when they're fresh, are very medicinal. Along with the oak galls, also the inner bark of the oak tree has a same sort of chemicals, but in a smaller concentration. So in the oak gall, the tree is pumping a bunch in there, but in the inner bark, so not the outer craggy bark, but the inner bark, after you take the craggy, outer bark off, the next living layer, the xylem and the phloem part, but the cambium layer of the oak tree, that also will have a fair amount of tannic acid and gallic acid in there. So you crush, sorry, I'm getting weird noises from next door here. Oh, is Claudia watching by chance?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Yeah, so crushed up the oak galls or strips, cut up, chop up the inner bark. And like with the bramble root, you start with a quarter cup of the chopped up oak gall or oak bark, inner oak bark, in a quart of water. Boil it down to half a quart. Add clean, purified water back to make it a quart, and drink 2 gallons of this a day. It is going to taste bitter like overly brewed tea, because tea, the bitterness from tea is due to the tannic acid. But in the end, the tannic acid and the gallic acid in particular are very good antimicrobial effects. Later on, when we talk about fungus and fungal infections, we'll go back to the oak gall again. But generally, the tannic acid and the gallic acid are going to help kill the bad microbes that are growing in your gut and causing the problems. And by drinking 2 gallons a day or more, you will replenish a lot of the water you are losing. And like before, again, we have a link to the scientific article there. I do want to point out the oak galls, like you see in the picture, this is what you... Anyway, that's what it should look like when it's on the tree. So pretty much from about now in Texas, June, into about mid-August or late August, you can harvest them and store them. If they are starting to get kind of black and mildewy and kind of rotted looking, they're too old. They're no longer good. But if you can harvest them now when they're in this stage and this appearance, you can store them in an airtight container pretty much indefinitely. And you will maintain that tannic acid. If you really want, vacuum seal it, throw it in the freezer, and then take a number of them out with you when you're out in the woods. Ooh, we have a question.
Or a bunch of questions.
Oh, good.
All right. Which oak has the highest concentration of tannins?
Ooh, good question. Generally, the red oaks will have a higher tannin concentration than white oaks. The easy way to tell them apart, and let's actually go back a page here. So if I don't know if you can see it very well, the leaf on the left-hand side, where it has very pointy lobes, that is a red oak. Whereas the leaf in the lower center and on the far right, that is a white oak where it has more of the rounded leaves. So for medicinal properties, the sharper, pointy the oak leaves are, the more tannic acid the different parts of the tree are going to have. Yes.
Are all oaks equal? I'm not sure what that means.
Okay, I guess we can answer that. So red oaks are going to have a higher concentration of tannic acid than the white oaks. As far as the gallic acid, I've never found any studies looking into that. But the tannic acid will be higher in the red oaks. Those are the ones with the pointy leaves. Any others?
What does a fresh oak gall look like versus an older one? Is the color completely different, or is it just a feeling? Like a texture?
Perfect. Okay, so here is a fresh one. This is what you excuse me, want to find, whereas a nice, even, light brown sort of color. And now, if I may, but as they age, if they start looking like this, so this is an oak gall that I recently picked,
It's not a turd.
not a turd. If it looks like this, it's too late. It's no longer any good. It's all mildewy. The fact that mildew is growing on it is a good indication that the medicinal properties are gone. So this is what you want. Ooh, I have another.
How long can you store the oak galls, and should you dry them before storing them in an airtight container?
Okay, storing them. It's wood, so you don't really have to dry it much. And a general rule of thumb, storing plant or like medicinal plant material, if it's dried, and I just consider wood to be dried naturally, it's good for at least 1 year. In some cases, well, in what for the first year, it will still retain most of its medicinal properties, like you won't be able to tell the difference. After that, it does start dropping off some, but even multiple years later, you can still use the oak galls. It's hard to do this. Um, so oak galls, figure 3 years if you have it in an airtight container.
And that's it.
Oh, that's it? Okay, so oak galls, a good plant. Next up is the sycamore. I think my personal opinion is the sycamore tree is probably the most beautiful tree out there, especially at least in the state of Texas. Um, sorry, I thought you were waving your hand here.
So I was dancing.
Sorry. So the leaves look like a maple leaf. They are simple. So the picture here is just one entire leaf. They have the serrated edge, so you can see the sharply, like a saw blade. Pinnate veins, where they have the center vein and the other veins come off it. And they do alternate along the branches. The bark, these are the ones, the trees, especially the big, tall, mature ones, the upper part of the trunk will be a bone white color. And then the lower part will be kind of peeling, like you see in the picture here, peeling brown and gray. Just an absolutely beautiful, beautiful bark. The bark is smooth and white. They remind me of the Malorn trees from The Lord of the Rings. Then in the fall, the leaves turn a brilliant gold color and then turn brown. And these leaves are huge. They're much bigger than my hand. That's usually what I'll use as a plate when I'm out in the wild. Now, because they are so big and have such huge leaves, they do a lot of transpire. They sweat a lot. they
Perspire?
yeah, transpire. Thank you.
Perspire.
So you will find these things again near water. They'll be in the woods, but along streams and ponds and rivers and so forth. So in the lower, like if you walk downhill, eventually you'll probably find water. That's where you're going to find the sycamores. So the part of these you use, like the oak tree, it is the inner bark. The sycamore does not produce galls, so you want the inner bark. You need to cut away, cut into the bark, get through the outer bark into the living cambium layer. I should also mention that you want to cut this in strips, vertical strips. You don't want to cut rings around the tree because that cambium layer, that living inner layer, that is the circulatory system of the tree. And if you cut through that, all around the tree, you've put a tourniquet on that tree and you've just killed the tree. So 1-inch strips, vertical strips, spread to as many trees as possible. Now, if this is a life or death situation, focus on one tree. But if this is, just you not wanting to end your camping trip or your hiking trip early, don't kill the tree, okay? 1-inch strips, multiple trees. So in the inner bark, you have tannic acid. which we already know is antimicrobial properties. It also has pectin. If you make jelly or jam, you realize pectin is a thickener, a thickening agent. And so what the pectin does is it helps kind of solidify your stool, if you will, and just, it's not as liquid, mushy, sprayy, gravy like. I'm purposely trying to disgust my daughter right now.
Oh, succeeded.
Apparently I succeeded. Cool.
We got a bunch of questions already.
Okay, well, we'll finish this sycamore here. But like we've already mentioned with the other, quarter cup in a quart, boil it down to half a quart, add cool, fresh, clean, disinfected water to raise it back to a quart, and drink 2 gallons a day. Like I said, the tannic acid is going to help kill the microbes, and the pectin is going to help solidify the stool. And again, there we got the scientific link. And so we have questions.
Yes. Hi. Wait. Okay. What are the green fruits on the oak trees called? Apparently they have them on their property.
Okay, green fruits, that's just a different type of wasp. If you break it open and it's hollow or it looks kind of like it's filled with spider webs, that is a gall wasp, but it's just a different one than which produces the wooden ball. Is that it, or is there more?
There's more.
Okay.
I put honey in mine. Does this change its properties or help since honey is also microbial?
Oh, adding honey is a great thing to do when you're fighting any sort of bacterial infection. The honey itself has a number of enzymes that produce, peroxide, oxidizing agents that are really good at killing the bacteria. It will also help, yes, it definitely will help kill the bacteria. It will help give you the sugar you need to deal with the weakness from the diarrhea. It's not going to really help solidify the stool any. You'll still be spraying gravy, but it's going to help in the long run. It will also help with the taste because the tannic acid. It's like adding honey to tea, really. If you overbrew tea and it has too much tannic acid, the honey kind of helps neutralize that. So the honey will definitely be a secondary antibiotic or antimicrobial and definitely improve the flavor.
Last question. Are sycamore balls good for anything except fire tinder?
Okay, I don't show it here, but the sycamore, they produce these balls. If you're familiar with sweet gums, they're about the size of the sweet gums. As far as uses, yes, it's like kind of like a dandelion puff ball made of wood. So if you break it open, it's very fuzzy and it does make good tinder. The other thing it works well as is as an improvised bobber for fishing. Eventually they have a tendency to get waterlogged, but they'll float for a good hour or so before you really have to switch it out with a new one. So the sycamore seed pods can be used as a bobber or fire starting or slingshot ammo.
That was the last question.
Okay.
Perfect.
Wow. Oh, hey, let's take a minute now again. Shout out to Wazoo Survival Gear, maker of all sorts of cool stuff, including the foraging bandana and just a cool thing here. So along with me, there's also Dr. Nicole Aplion, who has been on 2 episodes of Alone, and also Sam Thayer. This was a group project with some of the, a really famous plant guy, really famous herbalist, and me. So, all right. Okay, so sycamore. Next one is the willow tree. Hopefully most of you know the willow tree, but let's go over identification. The leaves are simple. They are serrated edges, and they'll be in the next slide, there'll be a close-up picture of the leaves. Pinnate veins, so it'll have the center vein with the other veins coming off it, and alternating on the stem. The leaves themselves will be long and narrow, lanceolate, so think like a long spearhead. The bark is going to be anywhere from white, brown, gray, even yellow, depending on the age. Excuse me, and what part of the tree it's found on. Oops, I have a mistake there. The bark, yeah, I did a copy paste error there. Ignore the peeling and ignore the smooth. The bark will be smooth out on the branches, but craggy on the trunk. And like the sycamore, the willow, it's a wet foot tree. It loves to be hanging out right on the edge of water, even halfway in the water. So you want to be looking for the willows along streams and rivers. The bigger the river, the more likely you are to find willows. And here's a picture of the close-up of the branches. Now, the willow tree is kind of interesting, as the main use for it for fighting diphtheria, diarrhea, food poisoning is they take the twigs and char them. So you want to get twigs a little thicker than your thumb and throw them in the fire and char the outside, because what you actually want from the willow is the charcoal. The willow tree makes a pretty high quality charcoal. It's a soft wood, it's fairly porous. So you get, it's not quite as good as activated charcoal, but as far as activated charcoal in the wild, the willow tree is going to give your closest facsimile to it, or the closest thing. So you char it to make charcoal. It also does have some astringents in it, kind of like tannic acid. Oh, here it says pencil size, but I was thinking about it, and pencil to thumb size. I was playing around, and the pencil ones do kind of burn up too much. With the thumb size, you get more char, and you scrape that char off, then you throw the stick back in the fire. So you make charcoal, you pulverize the charcoal. You want to get it as fine as you can get it in your weakened condition. You don't want big chunks. You don't want, big chunks. You want, crushed up powder. You want to make a slurry out of it. And like before, you want to add about a quarter cup to a quart of water, stir it in really well. You do not have to boil it, but it does work better if you can let it sit in the water for 2 to 4 hours before you drink it. This kind of helps it basically be more active when you do drink it. So when you do drink it, its main use it doesn't really have any bactericide, antimicrobial properties, but it is a good stool thickener, which is important, especially if you're running out of toilet paper. So it will help, slow down the water loss. You won't lose as much water. It will thicken up the stool. But as before, the more of this you can drink. If you're still losing a lot of water, you want to replace it with fresh, clean, purified water. But a charcoal slurry, about a quarter cup in a quart of water, and just keep drinking that. And that's going to help with the messy stool. So, and as usual, there is a link. Any questions?
Got a couple questions.
All right.
Are there any willow mimics?
No, there are no. Wait. Okay. Yes. That being said, it is not poisonous. There is. Do I have it on? Yes. Bring it up here. There is a plant called desert willow. And it's called desert willow because it kind of looks like a willow tree. Very different flowers. You'll find this like out in West Texas, out in Big Bend area, along stream banks, dried stream banks. It's not poisonous, so you don't have to worry. And if you do use some of its wood to make a charcoal, you're going to get some effect, but you're not going to have as good of effect as using true willow. You'll have a better activated charcoal using the regular willow tree than the desert willow. But if you can see it, here's like the desert willow. Uh, in the wild. This is out at Big Bend Ranch State Park, but it grows in the riverbeds, the dry stream beds. But the leaves kind of look. Oh, another identifying characteristic. Pretty much all year long, there will be these long dried beans hanging from the desert willow. The true willow does not have that, but that's the only real mimic for the willow tree. Any other questions?
Do you do all this prep stuff with the leaves on?
No, I strip the leaves off, especially because if you're using green wood, the strip the leaves off because all they're going to do is smoke and smolder, and slow down the charcoal process. You want the sticks just without the leaves. So it's okay to use the green wood, but take the leaves off just so you don't have to use as much fire to accomplish what you're trying to do. Because remember, you're sick, you're ill, you're vomiting, you're diarrhea. You're not going to be wanting to move around a lot because that's going to trigger the spouting, if you will. So strip the leaves off just to minimize how much fire you need.
And that is it.
That is it. All right. Okay, so willow trees. Yeah, so from this, like I said, you want to make charcoal from the branches and use that in a slurry. Okay, next up is the common ragweed. This is an interesting plant found all over North America in the summers. The leaves are what we call compound, so they'll have multiple leaflets. They are lobed, triangular. It's kind of hard to see in this picture, but in the next one you'll see more of what a triangular. So they'll be lobed, but they'll get wider towards the base. Pinnate veined, alternating leaves. The stems have fine hairs on them. The flowers are in the upper part of the picture here. They're very tiny, green. Most people do not recognize them as flowers, and they're on spikes at the tips of the plant. And these things are going to be found mainly in fields, open, sunny fields, openings in the woods. So here's a better picture. You can kind of see what I mean by the leaflets. I wish I had a pointer. Leaflets and multi-lobed and triangular shaped leaves. So for this, you're using the leaves, and like the willow, it's astringent. Kind of like tannic acid. It's not going to taste very good, but the astringency, that is a drying agent, so it's going to help the body, or it's going to help dehydrate the stool and make it less runny. So steep quarter cup in hot water. You don't necessarily want to boil this one. It's leaves. You boil bark and roots and heavy, dense material, but with leaves or flowers, you just want to let them soak in hot water. You do want to chop up, mash up, rupture those cell walls of the ragweed. So the more finely, the more surface area, the more disruption to the cell walls you can do to the ragweed, the easier it is for those astringent molecules to escape the cells into your water. But let a quarter cup of the ragweed steep in hot water for 30 minutes, at least 30 minutes. And as it cools, then start drinking it. Like always, 2 gallons a day. So it's going to help reduce the runny stool, and it's going to help rehydrate you. Now, if you're finding your dysentery, diarrhea is lessening, you can cut back on how much you're drinking. You don't want to keep drinking to the point where your body goes, oh, we need to get rid of this water. So as the diarrhea lessens, you can cut back on drinking water some. So if you're down to 1 splat every hour or so, instead of drinking 2 gallons a day at that point, you can go about 1 gallon. Unless you find yourself getting thirsty, and hopefully you realize the color of your urine is also a good indication of dehydration. I'll put that next week. Make a note, please. Um, at work, in all the bathrooms, we have check your urine color tables that say if your urine is this color, drink this much water. If it's that color, go seek help. If it's clear and copious, you're fine. Um, yeah. So, but that's a good indication of dehydration is the color of your urine. And like I said, diarrhea, one of the big problems is it dehydrates you. So the ragweed flower tea, like I said, its astringent nature is going to help solidify your stool and reduce the issues of that and reduce the dehydration. Plus, drinking less of it will rehydrate you. Any questions?
Yep.
Oh, good.
Why is ragweed called ragweed?
I have no idea. There's a story behind it. I have vague memories of why it's called the ragweed, but I don't remember now what it was. Sorry. Others?
No, sorry.
Okay. Wow, 8:46. Next up, elderberry. Elderberry is an awesome plant. So those of you who have been following me the last few weeks on Instagram or on Facebook, you can find me on Instagram, Merriwether Forager, or here on the Foraging Texas Facebook page. I've been doing multiple posts on how to tell the difference between elderberry, wild carrot, and poisonous hemlock, because the flowers look the same, but the other parts are very, very different, but you don't want to get those confused. So in the case of elderberry, it has a compound leaf. And if you go to the Foraging Texas website, you will see a compound leaf and multiple leaflets along the stem. Each leaflet has a pinnate vein, and they are opposite each other on the stem. So they'll be directly across from each other. The stem of the elderberry, it's going to be gray or green and very warty. Well, the mature trunks are, like the main trunk, especially down low on the base, it's going to be gray in color. And as it moves up, the newer growth is going to be actually a very intense green. And a lot of times the leaf stems are red. It's a very colorful plant. The bark, both the gray and the green, will have little spots or warts on them. Very distinctive. And again, if you go to the Foraging Texas, you can see pictures of that. Or even today's post on yesterday's post on Instagram or Foraging Texas. The flowers of the elderberry are white. They look like cauliflower. So they grow in what's called an umbels. So think of an umbrella. So it'll have a center stem, and then that stem will fracture into multiple stems, into multiple stems, into multiple stems. And then just each little stem will eventually end in a single flower. But so you have one stem, and that splits, and each one of those splits, and each one of those splits, and each one of those splits, and then you get the flowers. And they'll be kind of a half dome sort of shape. It really looks like cauliflower. The berries, and there'll be pictures of both these on the next slide, are going to be dark purple. It's spelled purple wrong. Dark purple in color and very small, like less than a quarter inch in diameter. They're little itty bitty, like the size of popcorn, really. They are found in sunny, wet areas. They like lots and lots of sunlight, but they also like lots and lots of water. So look for them again along stream banks. Basically the sort of places where you might have ended up giving yourself beaver fever from drinking the water without treating it properly. So here you can see the flowers and then the berries. So, and because the parts you use are the flowers and the ripe berries, in either case, you want to take the flowers or the berries, mash them up, add a quarter cup to 1 quart hot water, and let them steep for at least 30 minutes. If you have honey, this would be a good place to add honey, because then the drink is actually going to be quite good. Both the elderberry flowers taste nice. The cooked berries also taste good. Raw elderberries contain a volatile oil that has kind of an unpleasant flavor. But if you cook it or dry the elderberry berries, that particular molecule evaporates away, and then the elderberries actually taste good. I do know some people that eat them raw. More power to them. I eat the flowers raw pretty much every day. I grab a mouthful of the flowers, but the berries are better cooked. Now, how this works, the elderberry, both the flowers and the berries, are a proven, known immune stimulant. So it is not exactly a quick response. It can take 2 days, 3 days to get up to full speed. But by stimulating the immune system, your body can then better fight the infection. So ideally, you want to mix the elderberry with the other stuff that you're doing, like drink elderberry tea along with while the elderberry then stimulates the immune system to come in and finish the job. So tea, it's an immune system stimulant. It'll help you fight the infection, but it's going to take 2-3 days. So use it in conjunction with one of the others. And then, of course, drinking the tea rehydrates. Oh, this is one. Okay, it was licorice, elderberry, and dandelion, a comparison of antimicrobial properties.
Got quite a few questions.
Oh, questions. I love questions.
Okay. Are tinctures a good idea when you have diarrhea?
Yeah, so tinctures, that's an alcohol extract. Yeah, that's generally a good idea in small doses, but really you want the tea because you need to replace that water that you're losing. So if all you had was a tincture, yeah, go ahead and take the tincture, or take the tincture in addition to large amounts of the tea, but do not take it in place of the tea.
How long do you recommend cooking the berries?
Oh, actually, so 30 minutes. Just mash them up, put them in the hot water, and just let them steep in the hot water for 30 minutes. At that point, you can not only drink the tea, but eat the berries. Depending on what sort of food poisoning you might have, adding food into you may just stimulate the stomach to expel it again. But at least you got it in there, and you got the full dose of the immune stimulating chemicals. So go ahead and eat the berries, try and eat the berries. You can even eat the flowers, but remember, you do want to be drinking water too. What else?
Are the green berries good for anything?
No, really, you really want to wait until you have the ripe berries. The green berries are going to make you, well, they'll give you an upset stomach, which in the case of diarrhea and dysentery, you probably already have. It's like eating green apples. It doesn't take many of the green elderberries to start making your stomach kind of crampy in its own right. Anything else?
What is your best recommendation for drying, and how long do they last dried?
Okay, so I'm going to assume you're talking the berries. Dehydrate the berries. Dehydrating the berries is fine. If you want, you can lay them out on a cookie sheet, put them in your oven at like 140 degrees, and just keep an eye on them. That will drive out the volatile oil and cause them to shrivel up, or just a dehydrator on the berry setting. That's usually kind of a lower temperature setting. You can mash them up and make a fruit leather out of them too if you're dehydrating them. But usually most people will dry the berries, like I said, on a dehydrator rather than making a fruit leather, and then add the berries to muffins and pancakes and baked goods like that, which is kind of hard to do with fruit leather. Anything else?
That's it.
That's it? Okay. Wow. Okay, we only have 6 minutes left here. Luckily, we are on our last item. And in this case, it is not a plant, but it is a mineral. White clay, which is kaolinite. I think I might have, no, that's spelled right. I think that's spelled right. Double check the spelling on that. Kaolinite, if you are familiar with kaopectate, kaopectate is a slurry of white clay and pectin. You might remember we talked about pectin back in the sycamore. Where you find white clay is exposed along stream beds. Now, I want to point out that you want white clay. If the clay is red or black, that will have other minerals in it. It's not so much harmful, but it's not the type of clay that you want to help with the medicinal properties. Now, that being said, in 2004, April of 2004, for those of you that are interested, the FDA took white clay off the approved list for treating diarrhea. Not because it was poisonous, but just because in blind studies, they found that it probably isn't all that effective. That being said, many cultures still use it as a treatment for diarrhea. And if there's nothing else around, let's go with the white clay. So, like I said, it has to be white clay, not red clay or black clay. This isn't a great picture, but this was actually taken along Spring Creek on the north side of Houston. There are huge deposits of white clay all along it. From a distance, they actually look like white rock. It's not until you get up close and start jabbing at it with a stick or another rock, you realize, hey, this is clay. Now, usually the surface, as you can see, is covered with algae and other nasties like that. So you want to dig out the surface and get rid of it. You want the deeper clay that's basically been there for a million years or so, where it hasn't been as contaminated. That being said, you still want to boil it for a while to kill any bad microbes on it. You just don't start eating the clay right out of the ground. So what I found is you take about a 2-inch chunk, like a 2-inch ball, and crush it up really well. Drop it in some water, mash it up. You want to make a fine powder out of it. Then whatever floats, you skim off, and then hopefully you have a bottle with a cap. You shake it up, and whatever sinks right away, that's going to be sand and gravel. You want to get rid of that. What you want is the clay that's actually fine enough to be dispersed and suspended in the water. So you skim off whatever floats, you pour off into a pot to boil the dispersed stuff, and then the gravel and sand at the bottom of the bottle you just throw out again. So you want to take that dispersed stuff, then you want to bring that to a boil for 3 to 5 minutes just to sterilize it. If there's anything, well, then you let it cool. If there's anything new floating, you skim that off. There'll be like slag basically on the top. But let it cool, stir it up really well. If you had some sycamore inner bark, you could put that in there and basically make kaopectate in the wild, and then drink that. In this case, you'll want about a gallon of slurry and a gallon of just fresh, clean, disinfected water to help replace things. So you don't want to overdo it with the clay because you don't want to, cause a big clay backup in your colon. So, but the clay, it will help absorb the water and basically help solidify your stool. Okay, any questions on the clay?
Yes. Got one question. Is this that white gunk found along the limestone creeks in the hill country?
Most likely, yes. Yeah, it's going to be kind of a gray or white in color, and you can mold it like clay. If it's gray and white and you can mold it like clay, most likely it is going to be the white clay.
That's it.
That's it. All right. So, whoops. Ooh. So we covered the diarrhea, dysentery, and poisoning. Next week we are going to look at bleeding and infected wounds, and maybe if we get through it, fungal infections, how to treat those. Wow, it's 9 o'clock. We went through an hour already. So again, amazing thank you to Wazoo Survival Gear, makers of all sorts of things to get you home again when things go bad, but also the amazing foraging bandana available through the links posted by Merriwether here. I actually got it right. I pointed there. All right. So at this point, we'll let you get back to whatever you want to do the rest of the evening. Thank you so much for showing up, and we will see you next week. Much love. Bye bye.
Bye.